Order, order, and welcome to today's session of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee. Our session today is our second public session of our inquiry into workforce planning. It will explore some of the key themes that have been raised with us so far from the point of view of trade unions, trade associations, construction assurance bodies and the education sector. Our first panel will explore issues such as how to define a clean energy job and identify skills gaps, as well as consumer demand and labour supply. I will ask our panellists if you will introduce yourselves, and then we will start the questions. So if we start with Anna Markova and work our way along. Anna.
Yeah, my name's Anna Markova. Is the mic working okay? Yeah, okay. Anna Markova, I lead for the Trade Union Congress on issues of industry, energy and climate.
Good afternoon, I'm James Fotherby. I'm a Senior Policy Officer from the Aldersgate Group. We're a cross-economy membership organisation which brings together business, professional bodies, academic institutions to drive action for a competitive and sustainable economy.
Good afternoon, I'm Brian Berry. I'm the Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders. We're a trade association for small building companies, primarily in the repair, maintenance and improvement sector, as well as micro house builders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Simon Ayers. I'm the Chief Executive of TrustMark, which is the government-endorsed quality scheme.
Well, thank you very much. I have some questions before passing to my colleagues on the committee, and my questions are about working across government to deliver workforce planning. So do we need a national workforce strategy, or are existing cross-government structures and policies sufficient to deliver workforce planning? And who would like to address that question?
I'm happy to kick off.
Fotherby,
yes. So I do think the UK needs a national workforce strategy. A strategy is essential to mitigate some of the potential impacts of the transition. So skills mismatches, skills shortages, and ensuring that the benefits of the net zero transition and the job creation potential is distributed fairly across the UK and isn't just concentrated in areas like London and the South East. I think it's interesting to look internationally and other countries who are developing national workforce strategies. For example, Canada last year passed a Sustainable Jobs Act, and as part of that they're required to develop a Sustainable Jobs Action Plan every 5 years with interim progress reports. And the purpose of that is to look at sectors where there will be job creation, job loss, and then to develop tailored policy interventions, whether those are skills training, income support, to make sure that workers are supported throughout the transition.
Thanks very much, Anna Markova.
I think I'd add to that and absolutely agree with that. And I think it's worth pointing out that the people who we're talking about supporting, the people who we're talking about not leaving behind, are people who are absolutely essential to making sure that an energy transition happens. These are the welders, the chemical and electrical engineers, all these trades and professions that are in huge shortage right now. There's plenty of really highly skilled, highly trained workers within the high carbon industries right now whose jobs might be at risk, whether because of the transition or because of something else. And we really need to make sure that these people don't end up stranded, that these people are at the centre of our planning, and that is a big part of why a national plan is needed.
Thanks very much. And Brian Berry.
Yeah, thank you. So the government has stated it wants to build 1.5 million homes, and unless we increase the workforce by an extra 250,000 workers, we won't be able to deliver that number. So there obviously is a need to look at the workforce across the country. It's interesting that the government has accepted that in part with the recent announcement of the £600 million to encourage people to come into the building industry, and that's very welcome. Although it does need to go further in terms of retrofitting. The government's other target of 5 million homes to be retrofitted. We need to bring in obviously more people into the building industry on top of the 250,000 that has been identified. So at the moment what we're seeing is a slightly piecemeal approach, and so the call for a national workforce strategy would actually serve to underpin the government's economic objectives, which are very focused on housing and infrastructure.
Thank you. And I should say we've had written evidence and indeed oral evidence pointing out the related but separate challenges in the clean energy mission, workforce demands, and the demands in decarbonising homes and businesses, which I think was demonstrated in the slightly different answers that we had there. But Simon Ayers next, please.
Thank you. I think one of the things with a national policy for skills and workforce would be probably firstly to think about how we ensure that there is a long-term policy for the delivery of the green areas. One of the areas that we regularly find the feedback from smaller businesses especially is the uncertainty means that any policy that comes into play probably isn't being widely accepted. So I think longer term policy in terms of direction, I think clarity in terms of what we are expecting across those green areas in the energy transition. I think there is a very clear need also to reflect both on our existing workforces and our new workforces, on how they can be transitioned across, because that is happening now, and we are seeing greater amounts of people starting to look at moving from carbon fuel installs to low carbon fuel. So it is happening, but I think longer term policy, probably past a 5-year barrier as well, would be helpful in terms of making sure we have that ability to transition.
Thanks very much. And what impact do you expect the Office for Clean Energy Jobs to have on this agenda? Who'd like to take that first? Anna Markova.
Yeah. So the Office for Clean Energy Jobs, we really welcome the fact that this entity now exists and that it's tasked with sort of overseeing the jobs aspect of the transition. That is an absolutely essential office to exist. We understand that they're currently working on developing a workforce plan for the clean energy sector. So we hope that plan, whenever it comes out later in the year, we hope that plan does deliver the kind of level of strategy that we're all talking about here. What we hope is also a more ambitious approach, not just to skills and to plugging skills gaps, but also to job quality. And that's absolutely essential, because if the jobs that you're creating in clean energy sectors don't pay as well as alternative jobs, or aren't as safe, aren't as stable, that is also going to be a reason why you're going to struggle to recruit people into those roles and attract people to those roles. And we hope to see a greater role for the Office for Clean Energy Jobs in making sure of that as well.
Thank you.
If I can piggyback off Anna's answer, we really welcome the creation of the Office for Clean Energy Jobs. And I think something that's really welcome is that the office will work closely with other government departments, so Department for Education, Department for Work and Pensions, as well as the Home Office and others. And I think that will help to alleviate some of the lack of coherence and coordination that we've seen in the past across government. We'd really like to see the Office for Clean Energy Jobs do two things. So one is the development of clean energy workforce plans, which Anna mentioned, and we think that the office can really leverage the previous work of the Green Jobs Delivery Group, which was developing a Green Jobs plan prior to the general election. And then secondly, we'd like to see the office act as an analytical hub to tackle some of the data issues that we know exist. So the Green Jobs Task Force report in 2021 highlighted data issues like quality of jobs, which Anna mentioned, but also around diversity characteristics, which are really important to understand. I think there's a social science aspect too, so understanding how people are perceiving green jobs and what they see as the barriers to entry.
Before I move on to our other witnesses, I'll just come back to what you were saying. You see the ability to work closely with other departments. What is it in the way that the Office for Clean Energy Jobs is structured that gives you such confidence? Because historically, the silo approach to government departments has been a real block in delivery and right across government, but including this area.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in the past, for example, with the Green Homes Grant. So the National Audit Office found that the Treasury and the then Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy had sort of conflicting objectives for the Green Homes Grant. So for the Treasury, it was a short-term economic stimulus package, and for BEIS, it was about increasing the supply chain and scaling up the market to deliver long-term decarbonisation goals. So I think what I'd like to see is the Office for Clean Energy Jobs connecting different departments and really aligning together with the government's aims, so the industrial strategy, for example.
Yeah, what I was driving at is I think you were confident that this is that there is going to be this work across government. What is it gives you that confidence?
I'm hopeful that there'll be greater coordination.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, we'll take that for now. Thanks very much, Brian Berry. Back to the original question.
I was lacking that confidence actually because to be honest, I hadn't heard of the Office for Clean Energy Jobs until very recently. So that seems to be indicative that it's not reaching out across all government departments, and certainly not with the building industry, which you would have thought that the building industry would be part of this engagement. So that to me is very concerning. And what is a clean energy job? Is a standard definition? I don't know. I'm just curious about its function, how it's working across government, how it's supporting industry to deliver net zero.
I think that's a question that Annalise Midgley is going to ask you shortly, but before we come back to it, we'll ask Simon Ayers for your thoughts on.
Really, mine was similar to Brian's, to be honest with you, which is firstly, what is the definition of a clean energy role? However, I think part of the process here has to be also the delivery of a set of common messages. At the moment, we have different departments, different sectors, all giving different messages about their interpretation of what green energy will be. I think we have a different definition of roles, and I also believe that we probably need to think about some of the behavioural aspects that we should engage with those that are delivering carbon-based areas at the moment, because they are still not convinced that low carbon and green energy is the future. So I think there's a transition piece and a project piece that we should build there as well.
Well, thank you very much. I'll pass over to Annalise Midgley to follow up on those questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, everyone, for coming in today. I am going to ask questions around defining a clean energy job and also identifying some skills gaps. So my first question, Anna, I'd like to start with you answering this, is do you think that the government needs to adjust the definition of green, clean or clean jobs before it pursues workforce planning any further?
So I think rather than emphasising whether a job is or isn't a green job, what we think is much more helpful to do is to emphasise whether a job is or isn't a good job. This actually goes towards some of the kind of public engagement and public narrative piece as well. What polls find and what different types of studies find time and time again is that what people really care about, of course people care about a meaningful job, but people particularly care about a job that you can raise a family on, right? And so when government is communicating out about clean energy jobs, it needs to communicate about good jobs. And there's plenty of work, there's loads of work out there, both by industry, by institutions like Aldersgate Group, by government, and the Green Jobs Task Force has been mentioned. There's loads of work out there that reviews the skills gaps, that reviews where the challenges might be in attracting the workforce of the future. And for us, what matters much more than a tight definition is having a plan that addresses those skills gaps with an understanding of how job quality feeds into it, and with a way to make sure that people are attracted to these jobs because they pay well, because they're stable, because they know that they have a future.
Thanks very much, Anna. And just going on from that, we've had evidence in previous sessions that talks about the language that's being used being inclusive and supportive in terms of diversity. What's your view on that? And I'll bring others from the panel in as well if they want to come in on that.
Absolutely right. That and I think again, there's lots of kind of commendable initiatives out there within the energy industry in particular in terms of trying to attract a diverse pool of talent. What needs to go with that, though, is not just language; it's also practice. Are companies using anonymous recruitment processes? Are companies using diverse hiring panels? Are companies offering women, Black people, disabled people, the same progression opportunities as people who don't have those characteristics? All of these things need to be in place as well if the sector is going to be truly diverse.
Great. Does anyone else want to come in?
I was just going to add, actually, depending on one's definition of clean energy jobs, I'd like to think that all jobs in construction will become clean energy jobs. So for a builder doing home improvements, they should all be clean energy jobs because they're improving the fabric of a home. And actually, as we're thinking about retrofitting, there are opportunities there really to increase people from different backgrounds, particularly women, because only 4% of women are on the tools, and we desperately need to increase that percentage. Overall, the construction industry, it's about 14% of women. There are opportunities, I think, as we move towards a green economy, that women could come in and people of different backgrounds into our sector. So I think the retrofit work that we need to see more of to transform our existing building stock offers great opportunities, and we need to promote those to people who have not considered a career in construction. And hopefully that will tie in with the government's £600 million it announced at the weekend.
Thanks very much for that, Brian, and particularly what you said about women in construction, because I actually had that on my list in terms of people who think that work maybe isn't for them, including women. So maybe we'll come on to that a bit later, time permitting. So moving on to my second question, how can the government prevent public investment and subsidies from funding projects that fail to create jobs, or that create jobs but have got poor working conditions? Who wants to open with this, Simon?
I think we see some interesting challenges at the moment. Those challenges obviously are we have oversight of a number of government funded schemes. Those schemes include a level of support for training, education, development that will take them through that process. And I think we are, your previous question, that there is quite a lot of diversity now starting to come into that programme. I believe we probably, through the current scenarios, will see improved delivery in terms of ensuring that we get quality outcomes. And I think for too long we've not really measured the outcomes that a consumer receives at the end of that process. So I think that will change, and I believe the Minister will drive quite a level of change there. I also think that what we've seen from the research we've undertaken recently, so we had a set of research completed during December and January. 1,200 responses came in from micro and small businesses. And what they've indicated is that there is this desire yet to grow. So 45% of those businesses have vacancies. So we have a really amazing opportunity at the moment to get messaging right, to go to self-employed micro and small businesses to start to create that knowledge of a green economy, and picking up Brian's point, so that we're not just talking about a role that is something conceptual to them. We can start delivering that within the training and development. But I also think we should never forget that when we are talking about the repair, maintenance, improvement trades, they are more than just the green energy sector. So if you are having your home updated, you are then engaging not just in maybe low carbon or solar panels, you are then having decoration, you're having garden work. So there is a whole piece that has to come together to ensure that we are messaging correctly but training correctly.
Just picking up on that, I mean, what the industry needs, the building industry, needs certainty. I mean, a lot of my members say that they're really keen to do retrofit work, but there's a lack of demand, particularly in the owner-occupied sector, which obviously makes up 2/3 of all homes. But because of wider economic uncertainty and the fact that in the past we've had the Green Deal, the Green Homes Grant Scheme, government has brought in initiatives and taken them away, which creates a lot of uncertainty. And that means consumers are more reluctant to actually have the work undertaken. And builders, I think, are looking for those opportunities. But at the moment, there's very little to offer for a homeowner, apart from having the gas boiler taken out, that would encourage them to spend extra money to improve the fabric of their home. So the people in the building industry, particularly in the domestic building industry, there's an enormous opportunity for them. They want to actually step up and do it, but we've got to create that long-term certainty that there is a real commitment to actually improve the energy ratings of our homes. And that's not done over a couple of years. That's got to be like a 10 or 20 year period. And it's something that the Construction Leadership Council backed a national retrofit strategy, because that would give the certainty to the industry and to consumers that actually government is serious over decades to transform and deliver net zero.
This is something that has come up in several sessions, Brian. It's quite a consistent theme. Anna or James?
I can build on this question, if that's all right. So I think in terms of the quality of jobs, the risk that we're talking about is that government support goes to projects that then employ people in really poor conditions. So at the moment, we've got contracts for difference, for example, that have supported over the last couple of decades the enormous growth in the offshore wind industry that we've seen in the UK. And it's been really successful getting stuff built. But there are still people working on vessels that are building these wind farms that are earning less than the national minimum wage. To take another example, energy from waste plants. There are several examples around the country of energy from waste plants being built and refusing to pay their workforce the kind of going rates, the nationally negotiated going rates that other construction projects of a similar nature pay. So what we need to see government do as part of this workforce strategy and part of the industrial strategy is use conditionalities, say to companies, okay, you're going to get this support, you're going to get investment, or you're going to get a license to build something, but if you do it, you have to do it right, you have to treat your workforce right, you have to pay them going rate, you have to make sure that these jobs are safe, accessible, all these things that we were talking about. And in designing that, I think the really important thing for us is engage with trade unions and understand what these issues are that people are facing in these particular jobs. To the credit of the Office for Clean Energy Jobs, they have been pretty good at consistent trade union engagement so far. But from this engagement, we also actually need to see action. We need the incentives that government gives companies to actually have the teeth to deliver the good jobs.
We'll move on to Melanie on now for the next question.
Anna, the people on those vessels, who are they employed by?
They're subcontracted, and quite a lot of the time it's sort of internationally contracted crews, so they never actually enter UK ports. But I'd suggest...
Where does the responsibility lie then?
So with that particular example, actually, this is something that might get addressed through the kind of Make Work Pay agenda and legislative change there, because there's a kind of loophole there for offshore work. But I'd suggest getting evidence from my colleagues at the RMT trade union to get the full detail on this.
Thank you. In terms of labour, when it comes to a changing set of jobs that come with this transition, James, do you think that there is anything that government could do to ensure that supply and demand for that labour really matches up across the entirety of the country? You mentioned in your opening comments that there was a risk of things being concentrated in London and the South East.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, first of all, the government has a fairly good understanding now of the skills challenge. And we've seen recently, for example, the Clean Power Action Plan. It had an annex on the skills challenge. There's obviously the work of the Green Jobs Delivery Group. Other organisations, for example, National Grid, published a report recently, and they suggested that we'll need 400,000 new recruitments by 2050 in the clean energy sector. The gap, though, is figuring out where the supply comes from. So where the workers come from and what mixture of new market entrants, existing workers who are being retrained, and overseas workers. And that's much trickier. And also understanding the availability of skills and training provision across the country, because we know there are like cold spots. And so, I mean, I think there's a limit to what government can do on a national level, but I do think there is an important role that local government has to play. So local government can develop local skills improvement plans together with employers, which can sort of, on a dynamically develop employer-led and data-driven plans which can match the skills employers need with the training provision locally.
What comes first, the jobs or the training?
That's a good question. I think the demand needs to come first, and then the investment in skills filters through after.
Thank you. And I mean, you just talked about the cold spots around training. We have had evidence that there is a lack of skills in very specialist roles, particularly looking at things like engineering. technicians and things like that. Do you think that there is a need to recruit from abroad to deliver clean energy by 2030, decarbonising buildings by 2050? They're pretty significant targets. I mean, Brian, what do you think? Are we going to have to look elsewhere for our labour resources?
The short answer would be yes, because actually we've got a skills crisis in this country, and we do need to think about allowing skilled workers into the country. But that's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution has to be developing homegrown talent, because for too long we've relied on cheap labour coming into the country, which has undermined our apprenticeship and vocational training. So in the short term, because the government's got ambitious targets in house building, infrastructure, clean energy, it does mean if we want to get moved on those quickly, we'll have to think about allowing skilled workers into the country. But at the same time, it's absolutely fundamental. We have this reshift away from focusing on always higher education, but promoting vocational training. Good to see the government talking and encouraging people to come and learn a trade. We need that investment that the government's talked about in colleges of further education. The 10 colleges of technical excellence is really good, but these are in addition to, they're not in addition, they're just in building on existing colleges. And the great thing about going back to what my members do in retrofit, this would spread economic wealth all across the country, because there are homes everywhere, and that means local people can stay in their locality. Small builders don't tend to move huge distances, and you can spread that wealth. And research we did a couple of years ago shows that actually if you had a comprehensive retrofit programme, it could contribute to about 14% of employment in areas where there's obviously in areas with very low employment levels. So
how long does it take to train to participate in any part of retrofitting activity?
So in terms of retrofit, I think all the trades should be upskilled, because actually you can't see it in silos. If you're improving your home, you want to make sure that your carpenter, your plasterer understands the overall energy efficiency of the home. So those trades take 2 to 3 years in terms of making sure that they're fully competent. And there's another issue there about competence in the trades. And then you upskill in terms of learning the energy efficiency, the retrofit work, which doesn't take too long on top of the core skills that they should have. The problem in the building industry, especially for a general builder, is that anyone can call themselves a builder in this country. It's not protected, and that's why we've got an issue with cowboy builders and programs emphasising the damaging effects it can have on consumers. So we need to tackle competence of the trades, and I think that's a core part of any labour strategy in terms of transforming.
Workforce at the moment across
there is.
Construction broadly, isn't it?
There is. So 1/3 of the workforce.
To kind of get that experience passed on to.
So there's an opportunity there. 1/3 of the workforce is expected to retire in the next 10 to 15 years. But we know, and I think this is backed up by the TrustMark research, a lot of those people leaving the building industry are keen to actually mentor or train local people in their colleges. And this is what we need. We need more trainers to go back in. So that would be a very good.
Do that until the demand is there.
Demand has to come first. Yeah.
Before we get the trainers, before we do 2 to 3 years of training for these people, and then they have another 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get the experience to be able to do this. That sounds like a long way off.
Before you move on, actually,
Yeah.
Brian, you talked about the long term as well as the short term. Do the people exist to develop the skills to fill the roles in the long term in the UK for the work that you're...
But to train the workforce, because at the moment...
No, to do the work. Yeah.
To do the work?
Yeah. Do we have the pool of labour that we need to train long term? I mean, I take your point about...
We don't have that. I mean, looking at the figures from the Construction Industry Training Board, we don't have enough people at the moment, unless we're going to bring people in, and the government's focusing on those young people who are not in education or training. But are all of those suitable to work in the building sector? I don't know. So I think it's a transition. We're still going to need people from outside the UK to come in to help fill some of those gaps.
Longer term, can we do it with homegrown talent?
We need the ambition. Of course we can do it. We just have to have that long-term ambition.
And Simon, does your data back that up as well?
It does back it up. I think what we're seeing at the moment from the research and the data we already have from the work that's undertaken, we have a workforce at the moment that can manage the existing workloads. I think as we increase those workloads, then that's where we will start seeing the shortfalls really start to display themselves. I think the opportunity we mustn't forget is when we think about the Warm Home Plan, we are talking very much about place-based improvement. Place-based improvement should allow us then to stage the way we develop our workforce. So we should then be thinking about assessment of properties. We will have that opportunity to build the workforce to deliver each of those different phases. So I think there's a combination of both to make sure that we have the capability to deliver the requirements moving forward.
Thanks very much. I'll come back to Melanie on that.
Thank you. In terms of immediate need, and if we were to require support from other countries in terms of skills, is there a sense of which countries we would require them to come from, or where there is a excessive glut of said skilled individuals?
Shouldn't it be based on the skilled? It's the skills themselves we should be focusing on, rather than where they come from. I don't mind where anyone comes from, really. It's making sure they're competent to do the job that we're asking them to do.
Thank you. And Anna, my final question, in terms of the potential drawbacks of importing that skilled labour, do you think that there is anything that could come from that knowledge imported that would benefit local workforces?
So I think the important thing in terms of managing any drawbacks, firstly, is that government is very clear about using its leverage to make sure the jobs are good quality jobs. That means that the general standards of employment are being upheld. And I think the second thing is when you hear businesses, industries talking about the need for more flexibilities in visa regimes for recruiting people from abroad, you need to think about it in the context of how low employer investment in skills in the UK is. It's been falling for, I think, 15 years now, and it's very, very low as a kind of proportion of business expenditure in comparison to other European countries. So what we would like to see government do is, in the context of these flexibilities, to take a holistic look at it and think, okay, you're asking us to give you flexibilities, fine. Are you in return going to increase your investment in the skills of the future?
I was just going to ask.
Sorry,
just as
you carry on. Yeah.
There is a risk, as we have seen in some other energy sectors, of the creation of a two-tier workforce, importing skills from elsewhere.
Not if government uses the levers that it's got.
Can I just ask about demand? What impact do you think the government's decision to raise the standards expected in the private rented sector to EPC-C will make on creating the demand that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in here first. I mean, we were really pleased to see the consultation on minimum energy efficiency standards. One of our members, Lloyds Banking Group, did some polling of landlords back in autumn 2023, when the previous government scrapped the target, and they found that of 57% of landlords were aware of the target, and of those, 42% had decided to scrap planned investment in energy efficiency measures. And I think that shows you how strong a lever regulation is, and so we're really pleased to see that consultation. I think it will help drive demand.
Bearing in mind minimum energy efficiency measures, one of the things that we know from local authorities is the weakness in being able to enforce them because they don't have the capacity. So it's all very well having the standard in practice. What risks do you think there are around lack of enforcement? But I'm also interested in Brian and Simon's ideas on demand, but just to further press the point on the MEES.
It's a good question. I think that there's also lots of homes which don't have EPCs, and I think there's about 40% of homes in England and Wales don't currently have EPCs. So yeah, enforcement will be a challenge, and of course, lots of local authorities are under-resourced, and we've seen that in other things. We've done a report recently looking at the planning system, and there's under-resourcing with planning officers and ecologists. So it's a good challenge, and I think we'll have to have other levers as well. So you have the regulation, but you need other measures to support people and homeowners and landlords to install energy efficiency measures. So we have financial incentives like the boiler upgrade grant and things like that.
Brian, would that create the demand that you're talking about?
I think this helps. 20% of carbon emissions come from residential homes, and we won't deliver the net zero unless we actually improve our existing housing stock, and that's going to be a big challenge, and we're probably already behind in terms of meeting that target. So the requirement on landlords to bring their properties up to an EPCC, I think, is positive, and it helps to create demand, and actually that work has to be done by builders, so they're going to be learning those skills, which can only be good in terms of the market. The downside, of course, is I suppose landlords are selling up, and then those properties then go back into the owner-occupied sector, and there might not be the requirement to bring it up to a higher level. So looking at it more long-term, that requirement will need to come into place for all homes. I mean, you probably want to incentivise homeowners to improve the energy efficiency. We've seen that to some extent about taking out your gas boiler and putting in a heat pump, but that's only part of it. It's the fabric of the home as well that will need to be tackled. So it's part of the way, but what I would like to see that rather than in isolation is part of a long-term strategy, which I talked about earlier, over a 10-20 year period.
Thanks.
I think you wanted to just come.
Just to pick up on that point, we did some quick calculations from the data we have. From the over 5 million private rental properties, we think there's circa 3.1 to 3.2 million private rental homes that will have to be upgraded to make EPCC by 2030. So in terms of demand, that's creating a huge demand on top of what we already have. However, the piece that we should then be thinking about, and I think Brian and myself have spoken about this for many, many years, is how we bring the trades through to be able to help. So in other words, we find routes of development to allow the builders within the FMB to then manage those properties and help those properties on that journey. But we need to make sure that everything is meeting the requirements. And I think, again, we're waiting to see, dare I say, what the cap may be on terms of the investment in all those areas. But a huge opportunity, as is, obviously, we're expecting hopefully good news around things like the owner-occupier market and the support, which will create even more demand. So I think there's a prime opportunity now to look at the demand and match to the skills that we need, which will bring us back to probably the original question.
Thanks, Rach. Luke Murphy.
Thanks very much. So my question kind of leads on quite nicely. So I'm going to ask about the role of public procurement and other non-fiscal measures to drive demand. I guess one of my questions was around how can public and should public procurement be used to drive demand and drive numbers, but I think we've already talked about quality as well and wages. So I'd be interested, just beginning with, I think Tanya's kind of mentioned it already, just kind of, Brian, the degree to which you would want to see that happen through public procurement. And there's obviously there's some options there. It could be through contract for difference rounds in one part. It could be through some of the subsidies provided and the investment provided for clean energy schemes in homes.
So public procurement obviously is a very useful tool to put conditions in which would actually drive demand and in terms of retrofit work. My concern is that for the owner-occupied sector, my members aren't involved in public procurement. They are domestic builders who contract with homeowners, and that's 2/3 of the market, so it's 18 million homes that will need to be retrofitted. So it's actually how do you encourage those people actually to upskill? And that comes back again to having that certainty long-term strategy. So public procurement will be very good for social housing, and I think we're seeing the warm homes front and various initiatives happening in other countries, in Wales, for example, where it's been very successful. But it's only one tool. I mean, the bigger market's the owner-occupied market, and we'll need to think more creatively there with some long-term strategy plan or incentive to encourage homeowners to improve the energy efficiency of their homes.
So just on that point, what would you want to see in that long-term plan?
What would I
Well, you've talked about a long-term plan.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of what particular measures? Are there any particular measures that you're kind of promoting that you think you would
Well,
like to
I
be
think
in there to
what
see?
I'd like to see in that long-term plan is, one, for homeowners to have access to better information. What can they have done to their homes? And we know there's a consultation on the EPC. That EPC could be a much more practical, useful tool to enable homeowners to understand what can be done to their properties over a period of years. Whole house retrofit is really expensive, and it's unlikely people could afford to do it in one go. So better information with some improved EPC attached to the property would be one feature. I think the other would be in terms of in some form of incentive to homeowners. We've seen, the £7,500 to take out your gas boiler and put in a heat pump, but we do need probably something else to encourage homeowners, particularly those who live in pre-1919 homes, the solid brick houses, which are probably not very good for heat boilers because obviously the space and the lack of efficiency because of the solid bricks. And then you're going to have to think about some sort of compulsion, some sort of requirement, rather similar to the private renter sector, to give people warning that actually in 5 years, 10 years, the energy ratings will need to go up because you will need that stick at the end. So I think it's information, incentives, and then regulation.
And James, have you got anything to add on that?
I'd like to pick up on the point around consumer awareness of green products and services. So in the UK, we have very low public awareness of energy efficiency. So polling by Santander, for example, has found that just 10% of UK adults have a good understanding of energy efficiency measures. About 64% are aware of their, are not aware of their home's EPC rating. It can be really difficult to navigate the planning system, to find reliable and accredited suppliers and pick which energy efficiency measure is most appropriate for your housing type. What we've been calling for a while is an energy advice service, an independent energy advice service. And we've seen this, there's a similar service which exists in Scotland and Wales that would really help households and streamline the process, because that's currently a big barrier to action. And I guess there are other international examples the government can draw from. So Ireland, for example, has seen quite a lot of success with its one-stop shop approach and seen a sharp increase in deep retrofits.
Anything to add?
Yeah, if I may add, so the original question about public procurement, I think, is one that you have a number of larger businesses that will absolutely be looking at the procurement process, and a longer-term policy around that will allow them to probably create a subcontract market, which then comes all the way down through the tiers. I think outside of that, I would support Brian's view, which the majority of the sort of 280 to 300,000 small businesses that we operate within this sector wouldn't even know about public procurement, yet alone think about how it would impact them. So what we have to do is think about that communication and that messaging again, to show that actually there is a top-down, bottom-up style approach to ensure that everyone will see those benefits. So we will see that feed all the way through. And I think the benefits, it's an incredibly difficult story to get somebody that may be just retired, have no mortgage, no loans, but has they're asset-rich, cash-poor, to try to convince them to suddenly borrow money to then upgrade their property. So I think we've got to think about all those, the able to pay, the unable to pay, the unwilling to pay, all within that owner-occupier market, and that will drive our demand.
Anna?
Just to add a little bit in terms of the procurement that happens through local councils, for example, for retrofit projects, there is also a really big and important role there, we think, for direct delivery by local authorities as well, particularly in the kind of bits of the work that are about assessing homes, about providing information, about kind of long-term follow-up with people in their homes, about how these measures are working for them, about how to take care of them, all of that sort of stuff. is something that local authorities themselves might well be best placed to do and build up the knowledge, build up the trust, and that also helps ensure that these measures actually work for people in their homes. So there's a really important role there for direct delivery. And the other thing that I would just say about procurement is large-scale procurement, if you procure it as a large project, it enables you to train up a workforce like nothing else does. Like if you think of, let's say, Hinkley Point C, the largest construction site in Europe or whatever it is, that is not just a new nuclear power station, it is also a site where loads and loads and loads of people are training up all the way through, from sort of manual labourer through to engineer or other highly qualified trades. So that is also how we would like to see the large-scale procurement as part of retrofits. How can you use these projects? How can you think of them on that large scale in order to pull the workforce in order to take people through from not having any relevant qualification to being really skilled.
I'd like to come back to the safety point just in a sec, but I just wanted to ask Brian how it can be made easier for smaller companies and businesses to access public procurement, because quite often they're sort of blocked out because it's harder for them to navigate. Simon said many of them don't even know about it.
No, so it is about, one, information and making it easier for micro companies to undertake the procurement process. There is the Procurement Act, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and I think that came into force in February last month. So it'd be interesting to see the impact of that Act, which is about providing, I think, clearer guidance to local authorities about splitting up those larger contracts into smaller ones. So that hopefully will improve access to SMEs. That said, though, a lot of them are very, very, 2 or 3 people in a company. I can't see that they will want to engage in the public procurement process. So they prefer to carry on engaging with homeowners. But it will certainly help. But I think what we need to do is monitor the impact of the Procurement Act.
Just on contracts for difference, could you say a bit more about how you think that could be used to drive job quality and potentially higher wages?
Sure, absolutely. So right now in this year's round of Contracts for Difference, we've got the Clean Industry Bonus for the first time. Our understanding is that it's possible to build on this and for future rounds attach extra conditions on these subsidies. And effectively, government would be saying, okay, in order to access this subsidy into the future, you're going to sign a sort of 15 or 20-year contract. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to commit to investing in a particular way in skills, in apprenticeships. You're going to have to commit to treating your workers well to a certain standard. This can be made really simple. This can be put into a sort of Fair Work Charter or something like that. And that means that you're creating a level playing field to which the companies that are accessing these subsidies need to play. And that means, the competition's still fair, but people are getting treated well.
Is that done elsewhere? Similar, like other countries, similar models?
Yeah. I believe Germany's got conditions like that. Yeah.
Chair.
Thanks so much. Claire Young.
Chair. If I can start with Anna. How might the government better redirect existing funding pots more effectively to deliver the workforce for clean energy 2030 and decarbonisation of buildings by 2050?
So in terms of existing funding pots, I think it's important here to distinguish between spend and investment. Some things are funded through grants. That's money that government doesn't get back. Other things, like the investment in Great British Energy, like the investments through the National Wealth Fund, are actually it's sort of investing for a future return, right? And I think that's something that's that's an approach that's been indicated through the recent change to the last year's change to the fiscal rules, and I think that's really important in this context. Government ought to see the investment for future return as something as a separate thing, and as kind of investing in the future prosperity. In that context, we'd really like to see the investment part grow, particularly for the kind of long-term plan that Brian was talking about. Some of this will be, for a return, and that's really important to commit to a greater scale. And I think, in terms of the use of the existing funds, what I would say is, again, the use of conditionalities to make sure that the jobs are actually there. the choice that we have at the moment is you could be delivering your climate targets with a smaller workforce, potentially with fewer manufacturing jobs here, with manufacturing more of your wind turbine parts or building materials elsewhere, importing more and more things from China, or you could be building up the kind of industrial manufacturing capacity here, and that is the bit that really requires investment.
Thank you. James, there's been some of the evidence we've had suggests that rather than tax incentives and so forth, that more funding should be directed directly into training initiatives, further education colleges and so forth. So would you agree with those who suggest that those incentives aimed at consumer demand should be rebalanced towards labour supply more directly?
So I think the limited financial incentives we have currently, like the boiler upgrade grant, are absolutely crucial for driving demand. And I think removing them or rebalancing them could dampen demand and therefore investment in skills. I think, we're obviously operating within a tight fiscal environment, and so I think there's a premium on using limited public investment strategically in order to crowd in much larger sums of private investment. Learning and Work Institute has found that employer investment in training has declined and is less than our OECD counterparts. It's fallen by about 28% since 2005 in real terms. So I think we really need to be laser focused on increasing that. Part of that equation is through providing long-term policy certainty and regulation, which we've already spoken about. But again, on the public investment side, it's been interesting to see how the National Wealth Fund has been operating. So one of the first investments was a £750 million guarantee, which will enable Lloyds Banking Group and Barclays to provide £1 billion in lending, which is flexible and competitive to the social housing sector for retrofit. So I think if we look at those partnerships and focusing on how we can use our limited pot of public money to crowd in larger sums of private investment into skills and training.
And if I can just follow up on that. So there's a good example locally where we've got further education colleges wanting to work together on the possibility, likelihood maybe even, that we get new nuclear at Oldbury. Now, if money was being invested directly in further education and so forth, then you would deliver a pipeline which isn't needed at the moment, but is potentially going to be needed in a few years' time. So, taking the point you've made about all the incentives, and I agree, but is there a place for funding that allows you to develop the pipeline ahead for new industries that may be coming to particular localities?
So the conversations I've had with training providers, they said one of the challenges is not, it can take 4 years, for example, to train an electrical apprentice. They need to know that when they're providing these courses, that the skills which those apprentices will be gaining are useful for the future net zero economy. So that demand piece is absolutely essential. But of course, we need more funding for further education.
Okay. And my final question is for all of you, so I'll just start as Simon work along the road. Will the government hit its targets for clean energy 2030 and decarbonisation of buildings by 2050 without increases to existing funding?
I wish I was on the end of the other side. I think it's going to be incredibly challenging. We've talked a lot today around we have to develop a workforce that understands the whole concept of the transition, this transformation to green areas. The position for me at the moment is very much if we now need to be thinking about implementing rather than talking about just the solutions. So we need actions. I believe we have to run proof of concept. Your earlier question about investment also, I think the investment should be probably within the sort of low-level education programs. So we are creating a society that now wants to move to a clean energy environment. I think with that and with what we talked about today with investment now, it is achievable, but it's incredibly challenging.
Ryan?
Highly unlikely unless we've got a long-term thinking and it becomes a cross-party issue over the next 20 years. Otherwise, I can't see how it will actually be delivered. And obviously, the mood music is that some people are being very critical because the emphasis is much more on the economy. So it's going in the other direction rather than the direction you might want it to go into.
James?
To be brief, I don't think we'll be able to hit the targets without additional funding.
Okay, Anna?
I think you could hit maybe you could hit the targets, but the only way that you hit the targets and also get economic growth and also get jobs is by investing more, and you can just look to the likes of Canada and Germany for proof of that.
And a final question from Polly Billington.
A lot of what you said, forgive me, I have heard before. I'm wondering why you think it hasn't happened before now. The long-term strategy, the implementation, the targets, the investment. I mean, literally, the things you said I've heard since 2008. So why is that? Why haven't things changed?
I guess there hasn't been the political will to do it. It's in the hands of government if it wants to actually have a long-term strategy that will meet the targets. Any government could be setting out those targets, but it hasn't happened.
I think some of that will change now. For me personally, at the moment, I think that we are seeing now this desire to almost innovate more, which I don't think we've seen in the past. We're now seeing more innovation coming through, which means there is a greater desire to run the proof of concept. So rather than talking about the problem, which I think we have been for many, many years, we are now moving into solution mode, which is allowing us to test and learn, to then develop and move forward. And I think probably is, as a whole sector, we have to accept that sometimes we will try things and they won't always work effectively, but we can then learn from those to deliver correctly.
I think possibly a reason we haven't seen that long-term policy certainty in the past is an issue to do with governance. As I mentioned earlier, in the past we've seen a lack of coherence and coordination across government and putting a lot of pressure on Skills England and the Office for Clean Energy Jobs to deliver here. But I think having that central coordination is really key.
It's easier for government to do nothing, and then when government does nothing and lets things run its course, then you get decarbonisation by offshoring your emissions and your jobs and your industries elsewhere, right? So we finally got a government that at least kind of in writing is committed to not doing that and to decarbonising by growing our industries, by growing our clean energy industry, by growing our advanced manufacturing industries and so on. But like I said, requires investing as well.
Markova, James Fotherby, Brian Berry and Simon Ayers, thank you very much for your evidence. We will take a short break while we change panels. and welcome back to the Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee hearing on our workforce planning inquiry. I will ask our second panel if you will introduce yourselves. We will start on this side.
Good afternoon, my name is Tim Balcon and I'm the CEO of CITB.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Katy Heidenreich. I'm the Supply Chain and People Director at Offshore Energies UK. We're the leading trade association for the integrated offshore energy sector. We have over 400 members, operators, developers and supply chain companies. Most of our members are supply chain companies, in fact. We employ around 200,000 people, 154,000 people employed directly or indirectly. These people have highly transferable skills. They're proud to be playing a role in helping the country meet its own energy needs now and to play a role in the new energy projects of the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Andrew Hockey. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board. It's the industry-led skills body for the industry. It's a specialised industry. It operates across sectors such as nuclear, renewables, oil and gas, and other process industries. In a nutshell, the engineering construction industry is vital to meet the country's net zero needs.
Hello, I'm David Hughes from Association of Colleges, representing about 60% of the construction skills training in this country.
Thank you all very much. You're all very welcome. We look forward to hearing from you, and we will start questioning with Luke Murphy.
Thanks very much and welcome to the committee. There are a number of institutes across the country, including at random the Basingstoke College of Technology, that has a very forward-thinking, have got a green energy centre and electric vehicle centre, and it is a fantastic institute. But do you think it's clear enough either to existing workers or new entrants what learning and training they would need to do to enter a career in delivering either clean energy or decarbonising homes? I'll start with David.
I don't think it is clear enough. I think if you look around the country, Basingstoke College is a really good example, but there are colleges in all of your constituencies I could name that are doing the same sort of work to try and push the green skills through some of the traditional trades, some of the new jobs that are there. But there's not enough going on in schools to inform those choices that young people are making. There's not enough work going on the curriculum to make sure that all of the relevant qualifications have got green skills embedded in them for the future. There's not enough work going on for the existing workforce who might need to transition, whether that's with the same employer or it might be about moving employer. There's not enough work on the pathways that will support them. And I also think there's not enough work going on for unemployed people. So we need to get to Job Centre Plus careers and work advisors to get them to promote the industry. The industry doesn't have a fantastic perception. People think of many of the green jobs as dirty jobs, as kind of overall type jobs, the sorts of jobs that aren't paying well. It's not true, but the perceptions I think are going to get in the way of people making really good decisions. And then I think there's a whole lot more to do once people might be persuaded of a green job, to think about what the pathways are and what the support is that's needed for those different groups. If you're in a job already that's perhaps not going to be there, it's a high carbon job, the transition for you is really quite complex. If you're unemployed, you're going to have to get up to speed quite quickly. If you're already trained and working as a gas boiler fitter, what's the incentive for you to train in heat pump engineering? There's some really important questions that are quite basic and fundamental, that are not about strategy, they're not about need, they're just about the simple choices that people can make to be able to get the skills needed, that we all know are needed. The analysis of need is really strong, but the analysis of the pathways individual adults and young people can take, I think, are really weak.
Anyone else got anything to add to that?
I think I'd back up a lot of what David's just said there. I think entry routes in are sometimes unclear. If you're a young learner, you're faced with quite a panoply of opportunities. Could be T-levels in England, could be apprenticeships, other qualifications. So I think the awareness and the perceived attractiveness of certainly engineering careers could be improved. There could be more work done on that. We're doing some ourselves. And I think the alignment between education and industry could be improved as well.
And then Tim.
The small build I would have is to just, I think, reiterate the integrated nature of the energy workforce. I think many of the sectors that we're talking about today all share the same requirements in terms of engineers, technical trades, for example, that they need. I don't think it's helpful to place a value judgment on whether a job is clean or not, and I think it can be confusing for people when they're trying to look for a career, decide which sector to join, to see whether a value judgment is being placed on that role or not. And in fact, it's demoralising for the workforce today to hear value judgments placed on whether their job is clean or not.
So I'd agree with all of that. But if you look at how skills are developed within qualifications, you've kind of got a clue as to why the industry is not as forward-looking, or the education training system is not as forward-looking as it needs to be when you're looking at something like a transition to clean energy. So the point about definition is absolutely right. I think every job is a clean job, and we should approach it on that basis. But when you develop those occupational standards, often employers come together and describe the jobs that are happening now. They rarely describe a job that's going to be happening in the future. So consequently, the education and qualification system is always a lag behind either where industry is or it would like to be, or when you've got something that needs to be a transition, then there's always a catch-up. And then you have to circumnavigate the formal qualification education system or create something new and specific for that particular problem.
Thanks. I mean, I guess just picking up on Katie's point, would others agree that it's up, and actually from the panel previously, which they were making a slightly different point in the calling them green jobs actually to a lot of clean jobs, is it better just to talk about good jobs?
I mean, look, I'm not sure there's a binary right-wrong on this. I think there are a lot of young people who are quite attracted by working in a clean energy system and are quite attracted to that route. So I think selling it to them in that way, I think, is really important. I think gas boiler installers now might need a different kind of way of persuasion to train them in new jobs. For them, it will be about, can I make as much money from heat pump engineering as I can from gas boilers? So I think that a nuanced approach is right, but I do think there is an attraction of green energy, clean energy.
And David, you talked in your earlier answer about career pathways and training. How can the government ensure that they're fit for purpose, and is more money needed to deliver them?
You very rarely hear me say that more money isn't needed. I mean, the FE sector's been massively under-resourced and underfunded for too long. What we've seen all around the country, and as I said, there are examples in all of your constituencies I could bore you with, of small amounts of capital, small amounts of revenue going into colleges where they're partnering with groups of employers to meet their needs and to do that curriculum development that Tim talked about that is so important in terms of the getting that lockstep between the demand and the delivery of skills. It's really difficult, isn't it? If we leave it to the market won't work, so we have to intervene. We've got hundreds of examples of colleges doing that. The partnership is so critical because people need to see the job that they're preparing for and believe that job, and you only get that if the employer is committing. And then the college needs to be very, very agile and responsive and develop the courses quickly. And I could take you to lots of colleges where we're seeing that. But that does need investment. The amount of money announced this weekend by the Chancellor, the 625 million, I think it's a really good package because it gives colleges some capital and revenue. There's some money in there to incentivise employers. The employers have said they'll back it. There's a really big part of it which is about marketing, to try and persuade people that construction is a good sector to work in. So it's that kind of package we need across the whole of clean energy, not just the construction part of it. So yes, more money, but more money at a local level. We don't need more national strategy and national analysis. We know that. I think we've got to get down to the locality.
Someone later on will be asking about devolution, but it's a very good point. Katy?
Yes, I'd just like to highlight to the committee a piece of work that we conducted last year that highlighted just how much is going on in the skills landscape. There is an enormous amount of skills initiatives up and down the country, across sectors. We counted 200, and I'm sure we didn't count them all. It's an incredibly fragmented landscape, so I think before any more money is committed, it would be good to take stock of what's already going on, roll in behind some brilliant initiatives that are happening at a regional level and at a national level before we take any further steps.
I think I'd come at it, if I may, Chair, come at it a slightly different way from Katy, not very different. I think it really isn't necessarily about new money. It's about better deployment of what we've already got, and we do that through collaborating. And some of the things we've done at the ECITB, our Work Ready programme's an example. We've used no new government money, but it's bringing in long-term unemployed through a joined-up approach with DWP. The learners can continue to claim their benefits, continue to claim universal credit. Employers who guarantee them a job at the end of the 16-week programme that they undertake. So it's actually joining up and bringing in local authority money as well, collaborating, making sure we use what we've already got, and then co-funding can also do. We've invested in the Catch facility, for example, in Grimsby, which is a further education facility, doubled its capacity to turn out welders in the course of a year, and we did that through a partnership between ourselves. We put some seed capital in, and then local government, local industry, including the Phillips 66 refinery on the coast there, and putting all that together, creating a package that was then able to be put in and create genuine capacity. So I think it's deployment of what we've already got as well.
So there's, if I can answer two sides of that question, if I can. Your first one on clean energy and attracting new people. We did some research in a previous life when I worked for the environment of a professional body for the environment. And it was very clear that if you're attracting Generation Z into a sector, they are more likely to look at a purpose-led role or a values-driven role rather than a kind of financial role that does that. And actually that clean energy kind of package, if you like, is quite appealing in some ways. But when you look at the conversation I've been in previous committee, where there was given evidence about building, it doesn't translate to that level where you know the skills in the workforce are already there to transition to clean energy, what we would call clean energy kind of roles, whether it be insulation, heat pumps, etc., etc. So it's a question of how we pick it. And by the way, for the last 10-12 years I've been dealing with the definition of what clean energy job is. I've never come up with one that works, so I do think it's nuanced. But going back to Andrew's point, I do think there's loads of money in the system, and I think there's a lot of wastage. So what we are seeing is in FE training into construction, I'm talking about specifically, that around 70% of those that start a construction-related qualification do not complete or do not end up into construction industry. And if you total the amount of cost there, then it's probably better that it's more targeted.
It's very, so finally, there's obviously a bit of a disagreement about levels of funding in the system, but we talked about public funding, but we've also been told that the level of investment by employers into ongoing education and training is half what it is in many European countries. What's the reason for that, Katy?
Employers need to see viable projects to put people into work on. I think with the confidence, with the certainty of a pipeline of work, then employers will be better placed to make that investment that they would absolutely agree is needed. But certainty of projects, certainty of work is essential.
I mean, the structure of the industry doesn't help, does it? So we've got a tier one set of employers who are very committed, but there's an enormous number of very small enterprises and lots of self-employed people. And that makes it harder, I think, to make the investment work. But I think the other thing that is really, really clear to me is that and Tim's point about there is money in the system, it's not being utilised effectively. Well, that requires a partnership. You know, the colleges can pump out people with skills, but unless there are employers willing to take the risk with them, and there is a risk, and actually to take them in on-site and to give them the on-site skills and to help them learn what delivering those skills are on-site, then actually there is there's a break point. So there is that partnership and that commitment. The government's got a massive job to do as well in making sure that, previous discussion in the previous panel, that the supply chain, the procurement includes the apprenticeship programs that are going to be necessary. Lots of young people want to do apprenticeships in this sector, but there aren't the opportunities that are there. So I think there's quite a few things that need to be done.
Could I just follow up on a couple of things? The 200 different skills programs across the country. Now, I'm all in favour of let all many flowers bloom, but that sounds to me like a huge lack of strategy. Would somebody like to express some views on that?
I think there is a lack of strategy. I think what we need is to translate all of the analysis of what's needed by industry into a strategy that works. And it comes on to the devolution question a bit. Who convenes that? You can't do that nationally. It has to be done at sort of a more local level. So the elected mayors and so on is a good level. And there are some really good examples. Liverpool City Region, the 6 colleges working together on a clean energy programme that meets all sorts of different needs, from heat pump engineers through to EV motor vehicle mechanics, you know, and actually starting to provide some simple strategy for that region so that employers know where to go to get the expertise, rather than all 6 competing on everything. So it can be done, but I think it has to be done at that sort of level, not nationally.
And 2 further follow-up questions. 70% of them are not finishing. Is that because they're getting a job before they finish, or is it because they don't like it?
It's really hard to track, but we suspect
that is literally what colleges should be doing, finding out why people are dropping out. That is literally their job, isn't it?
What I'm hearing is a fair proportion of those have a job in a construction-related sector, but I don't know entirely what that means. But what we do know is the construction industry is screaming for skilled workers. But the point about actually employers not employing is also part of the equation. There's 2 halves of the equation here. We're training people that don't get jobs, and employers are not employing people. We're not employing trainees. They would much rather employ skilled workers and not the trainees. So that investment in training is not happening at the employer level, at the level, I think David's alluded to that quite accurately as well. But the training process is not adequately aligned to what our employers are asking for.
Can I ask one final question, which just follows on from what people were talking about earlier, is that this is an ageing workforce. I'm also aware, and we've been told this before, of how spectacularly underpaid FE teachers are in contrast to other parts of the education sector. If you've got a whole load of former skilled construction people, you might be ready to maybe not have to climb up a ladder anymore, maybe. Would there be some kind of programme that might help them?
There is.
And there is. Good, that's great. Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is something that the ECITB are particularly keen on working on. We're doing it up at Sellafield with sector experts into training. So we're actually bringing people back in. I can write to you afterwards and give you more detail. But bringing people back in, experienced people back into the Lakes College up there to actually teach nuclear skills. We've seen that. We're working with the DFE. Actually, there is a dual professionalism initiative that the DFE is running, that we're working very closely with them to actually work on precisely that issue. So there are initiatives up and running to help here, and there's a lot we can do.
Can I just answer your previous question as well?
Yeah.
The progression rate of FE students into work is incredibly high.
Yeah.
The issue is they're not going into the trades because they're not getting the opportunity to translate the skills they've got onto site. So hence my point about the employers need to help with that. On the pay issue, the good news about the 625 million was that there was a recognition in that in construction, colleges already pay more, but they're very constrained because they're funded at a very marginal rate. So there's a rate increase for construction training, which will allow them to pay a market premium to attract staff. It's really important that we get the pay right. Yeah. And there are lots of examples of employers, again, starting to share. There aren't many construction workers who want to become full-time lecturers and trainers, right? But there are quite a lot who will offer their experience to the students, and there's a lot of that happening. You know, a day a week, making sure that it's very relevant, helping the curriculum development. It sounds a bit boring, but there's a lot of that happening.
The other thing, if I may, that's very effective is bringing in recently trained apprentices to come back and give the benefit of their 2-3 years experience to new entrants to the system.
Again, these things that need to be done more systematically. Yes. Is my question.
So we're aligning some of the activity that we're doing with the work that Andrew's doing as well, so make sure that we kind of got a coordinated approach to this, but just highlight some of the challenges that we're facing here. The average construction salary is about 45k. So within a college you're looking at not much more than 35k, so there's your gap already. What we're also hearing is that those that do go into college, it's probably a lifestyle choice rather than anything else. But a number of college principals have said there's a revolving door around construction trainers. For the simple reason that actually what they want to do is to teach the students on the skills that they have. When they're embraced with all of the educational demands as well, then that becomes, actually that's not why I come into education in the first place, I just wanted to pass on my skills. So the kind of challenges and barriers to that, but David mentioned the package that was presented over the weekend. That does actually start to target and give some supports to be able to do that. So the work that we're doing with DFE, with ECITB as well, there is activity that's focused specifically on that area, which I'm kind of more optimistic about. That's
great. Now, you're going to move on to some other
Mike was going to
questions. Unless, are you happy to pick them up now? But
to pick them up if you want to.
Before you do, it'd be really, really helpful to get some more detail on what you've just been talking about in those last questions. I think between you, actually between all four of you, there's a really, really important thread there in some of the recommendations that we'd like to be able to make to government. So if you can pick that up, and that's a general point, but I think that was very, very insightful. So thank you, Mike Reader.
Time limit.
I'm sure you will keep to it.
Okay, I'll go for 7. How about that? My question set is around the skills and skill levels and occupational barriers to access, and I've got a question for 3 of you, if that's okay. So for Tim, does the government need to establish a stronger baseline quality on standards and competency?
I would like industry to establish a stronger baseline on competency, and CLC are doing a massive programme of work at the minute which is around competency, and what's behind that is to have one definition of competence. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing, and I think there's I hear different numbers, somewhere between 600 and 1,000 people from industry contributing to that programme of work. It's a phenomenal programme of work, and CLC have led that, and I think it's right. What we need to do though is for government to embrace those standards through their learning pathways. So for example, at the minute, the diplomas which the colleges teach aren't aligned to the apprenticeship standards, which is why employers have a difficulty with them, because they're not quite sure that it's the skills that they want. So I would much prefer that industry leads on that where possible, and that government embraces those standards determined by industry.
Do you think the specialists within the DFE who would do the strategy around curriculum will really listen to industry? Have you seen that in the past?
I can tell you that from what I've seen over the weekend, I think that's a really good example of where DFE have listened really hard to what we're saying, because we have a kind of burning platform with the 1.5 million houses. We have an infrastructure plan that's kind of coming out. We've heard on the previous committee that long-term pipeline of work. So I'm really pleased that we are starting to listen and all work together on that one. And I do think it is a collaboration. I think between the missions board concept, which is where you've got industry coming together with governments led by DFE, and importantly the other government departments are part of that, I think is a mechanism there to really establish some of the address some of the challenges that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Andrew, how might the government widen access to green jobs without compromising quality?
I think, first of all, I don't absolutely accept that there's a need for a trade-off there. I think green jobs is, as Katy said earlier, is an interesting term. I think we've already got, as a result of the energy transition, a really great opportunity to create a whole range of entry points into industry for everyone, from the long-term unemployed, through apprentices, through postgraduates, as well as older people looking to come back in. So I think, I've mentioned already our Work Ready programme. That's supported. We've supported 100 long-term unemployed last year, and another 130 to come this year to help bring them into the labour market. They're providing skills that are actually in demand. So we're also getting a more diverse talent pool that way. So I don't think we really need to have that trade-off between access to green jobs and hampering the quality of skills. I don't think it's actually there. I think there's a lot we can do across the piece to bring in a more diverse talent pool.
Thank you.
We'll of course work with Skills England, for England anyway, as time moves on, to make sure we
pen that down.
Yes, once we know what Skills England's final setup is, of course. And to David, does the government need to establish a new body responsible for training, accreditation and delivery, or does this kind of greater collaboration of industry and government suffice?
Yeah, we don't need another body. I mean, we really don't. I think what we need is an alignment, though, much more alignment. So everything that Tim and Andrew just said, I think, is right. But let's be really clear. Once you try to centralise and nationalise standard setting, you miss out hundreds of thousands of SMEs who feel completely disenfranchised from that. So the Institute for Apprenticeship and Training, they were pleased if they got 80 or 90 or 100 employers involved. There's a couple of million in the development of the standard. We're pushing the commitment that was made over the weekend to set up 10 technical excellence colleges, to say, well, why don't you give them some of the role of engaging to make sure the standards are right and give them some flexibility? Because it's very, very often SMEs are saying the rigid standards we have in this country just don't quite work for the jobs that they have. In other countries, there's much more of a modular approach, there's much more of a core and margin approach, there's an ability for the local college with employers to be able to bring in modules from different standards to meet the jobs. This country, we don't allow that. So often an SME will say, the apprenticeship standard that you've got doesn't quite work for us. We need a bit of this one and a bit of that one. And there's no facility to do that. So we've got to have a system where there's more agency at local level between employer and the college to design something that works for them and the workforce they've got. And that's also true for the retraining bit. Because a lot of this is not about new entrants to the labour market. It's existing people getting modules of training. Right. So if you modularise the apprenticeship standards and you use the new growth and skills levy, you can start to retrain some of the people who were trained under the old standard that's a bit out of date. But if you don't do that, if you don't modularise it, what do? They start again? So there's a real kind of agility to the system we need. So the standards are really important to be national, but they need to be kind of tailor-made as well.
And I don't mind who picks this one up, but do you think, as industry has to now modernise, and has to modernise quite quickly, because we're going to hopefully see modernisation of the construction industry, we're 9 years past Modernise or Die by Mark Farmer, can curriculums, accreditations, etc. keep up with that modernisation that's needed in the industry? Because I had people coming into the sector to teach, but they're teaching the skills they probably have had for the past 20 years rather than maybe the skills we need in the future. So is that ecosystem there, that curriculum will continue to evolve quicker and quicker as modern methods of construction and everything come into the sector?
Well, look, I mean, our line to DFE at the moment is these new 10 new technical excellence colleges in construction should be a network helping make that happen. Because they'll be on the ground, they'll be talking to the employers, and they can work nationally. So you want one system, but you need it to be out there and listening to what's needed.
If I can just build on what both Tim and David have said there, into what we've learned as part of the Energy Skills Passport work that we've been doing together with Renewable UK, is that more modular approach, standardisation, is what is going to help make it easier for people to move back and forth between sectors. It's going to make it much easier for people going into work to see how they're going to be able to move back and forth between sectors.
And that moving back, Tim, you can come in on this. Is government recognising that in the way, in the direction they're moving? Because I think you're right. We're going to see now as different trades, experiences come and go, that we need that agility. Do you think government's recognising that in their strategy going forward?
I think the missions board would meet that challenge. But that's, the burning platform is 1.5 million houses and the infrastructure, all that coming down the line. It's very clear this government actually wants to build 1.5 million houses, and it's pulling out all the stops to be able to do that. And in recognition of that, we need a much more agile response from the skills system to do that. So the mission board's concept was, I think, a direct reply to that particular challenge. But if I could go back to your previous question regarding around that lag between the workforce and how industry working. So you mentioned Mark Farmer, the do or die kind of report. That was based on the industry needing to transition to modern methods of construction. Now, actually, that didn't happen in the way that it was presented to. So the danger is that you equip a workforce with skills that aren't going to be needed. So there's a real demand-led approach that has to be delivered here. And the only way you can properly give foresight to that is for the industry to come together So you get an industry view, not an individual view from one company who's investing in modern methods of construction, etc., etc. So I know with the house builder, I know that NHBC have put £100 million into this. They're bringing all the house builders together so we can determine where the demand is, and once we can determine demand, we can then put a skill solution in place. So on that model, you can actually adapt quite agile and quickly to the demands that you've got. But I don't see that happening across other sectors in that way.
Andrew wants to come in and
yeah, there are things you can do from the last couple of questions there. We initially started off talking about baseline competence, and we've run with Katy's involvement, we've run an initiative called Connected Competence with the North Sea workforce, where we've actually measured competence of an individual. They're then able to that's tested. They're then able to move and transfer within the offshore workforce quite easily. So we've given them transferability. That helps with the agility point. And then I always like to give solutions. There are a couple of other initiatives we're involved in. We've kicked off 2 pilots actually up in Scotland, one at Nesgol and one at Forth Valley College, for transfer of oil and gas technicians in mechanical, electrical and project controls across into the wind sector and back again. So they will be tested on a 6-week basis, and they will be able to move across into offshore wind, come back into oil and gas if they need, but they'll have a badging and a clear definition of their competence to do that. So there are again initiatives that are happening where we're starting to move.
Katy, the final word.
Yeah, just wanted to make a brief point that we are starting to hear government recognise the integrated nature of the workforce and the supply chain. The Clean Energy Task Force that was co-chaired by the Secretary of State and Minister Jones in January saw sectors coming together. Oil and gas were there, nuclear were there, wind were there, the colleges were there, the unions were there, but more, there's more needed.
And before I move on to Torquil Crichton, you mentioned the phrase the skills passport, and I'm very interested to on your assessment of how effective you see it being.
We're in very early stages. It was brilliant to see it launched in January, and the government support. The Office for Clean Jobs have played a really strategic role in making that happen, and we're grateful for that support. I think what we've learned, and I've mentioned this earlier, is the more we can talk about an integrated workforce, the more that we can standardise how we describe jobs, the training that we need across sectors, the easier it will be for us to make sure that the current workforce can easily move back and forth, and that we build the energy workforce that we need for the future.
Yes, I was hearing a story yesterday about almost identical life jackets in offshore renewable activity and in offshore oil and gas, needing entirely different training courses for you to be able to wear them. I take it that's an example of the sort of challenge that you face that you would like to standardise.
And the skills required, the jobs that are being done between oil and gas and hydrogen or nuclear, for example, are very similar. We are at danger of overcomplicating what's required in order for us to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, Andrew.
I can back that up with some numbers. Certainly our census last year and the work we've done suggests that actually skills that you need, pretty much 90% there are transferable skills, and then what you need to do is then supplement those with specialist skills for where applicable, whether it's in hydrogen or whether it's in CCUS. A hydrogen engineer really is a chemical engineer, so there's a lot there that's common, and we can work off that base.
It's quite normal for particularly suppliers of business activities to do a training course for one client and have to do the same training course for a different client, and then do another similar training course for another client. And the problem with it is the currency of skills is not transferable from one to the other, and there's an enormous amount of waste in terms of investment that goes into that example.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Torquil Crichton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming in. It's fascinating evidence. And Katy, I will ask you about the skills passport, now transitioning from oil and gas into renewables. But I want to push David a little bit on what you said and what some of the panel have said about skills and training, about a fragmented workforce, about losing people from college. about some courses who are really good, like taking people from the DWP and putting them into work. I've seen that in my own constituency with Harland Wolff, now in Avantia. It does work. But David, you said there wasn't a need for national coordination of this, that it's better to be devolved. Do you not think there should be a national body or a UK body to set out what the skills level should be and what skills portability should be?
I think trying to get a UK body, given the way devolution has gone, I think might be quite ambitious. The politics of it.
The Office for Clean Energy Jobs?
Office for Clean Energy Jobs, Skills England, I think, are the bodies that we've got to work with. And in Scotland, obviously, that doesn't quite work.
Anticipate my next question.
Yeah, no, completely. And I mean, we work with colleges across the four nations and actually in the Republic of Ireland, and there's an enormous amount in common. I think we can work with the supply side to get that consistency, rather than requiring some new body to try and do some kind of monumental job of bringing together four nations with very different politics and very different history. So I think that's just not the way to go. So, and then employers, I think, need to also work with that complexity. You know, other countries, I was in Australia recently, it's a federal system, there are different systems. In Germany, it's a federal system, there are different systems. The employers recognise the shortcomings of that, but are willing to work with it. I think we've got to ask our employers to do that, because trying to get some national UK-wide body, I think, is too ambitious. But there's an enormous amount that colleges can do together to make sure there's commonality. And the core competencies are the same, aren't they? As well.
I'll come to you in a second, Katy, just to follow up on that, and you mentioned it yourself. We have a devolved set up, not just, we hopefully have some more devolution within England, but there is devolution amongst four nations. How do you get people to cross across from the southeast of England, where we've heard there might be a concentration of trained skilled workers, to the northeast of England or into Northern Ireland or Wales?
I think that's where the employers come in. And the previous conversation, I think there's a really big question about people transitioning from one sector to another, and the attitude of employers to look at the 90% of skills that are there and to commit to do that 10% top up. I mean, just another national, in the Netherlands, a lot of their national qualifications are 70-30. So if you train in logistics in the Netherlands and you're in Rotterdam, it's all around the harbour and the port and that type of logistics. If you're in Amsterdam, it's around Schiphol and the airport. And the employers recognise that the 70% is common and the 30% is particular. And we need more of that type of system, I think, where the employers say, well, okay, there's a commitment from the state to train people to a certain level. We want some agency to design the other bit of this, to make it specific to my industry, whether that's in Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales or England or the southeast or the northeast. And we'll do that, and it's a quid pro quo. And I think we need Skills England to commit to that type of approach. It's a new body. I think it's got a new team. Let's really push them to commit to that type of flexibility.
You wanted to come in?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I think just highlighting the work that we've been doing with the Office for Clean Jobs on the Energy Skills Passport has involved very close working with the Scottish Government. So I think that's a really great example of where governments can work together to make skills initiatives really effective. And employers will move people where they need to be. I think it's important that we don't put up artificial barriers that simply aren't there in real practice.
Mm-hmm. Good. Katy, I'm glad you described that the Offshore Energy UK is very proud of the workforce, and the workforce are very proud of what they do. We're proud of them too. You know, they've kept us secure for 2 generations. They've kept communities like mine afloat for 2 generations. But if they're going to transition, it's going to be quite hard, because if you're an offshore electrical engineer, you can earn 20k more than you can if you're a solar panel engineer onshore, for obvious reasons, the risks and the time offshore. How is the industry going to, or how is the workforce going to transition if we don't get a more equalisation in pay? These people might just go abroad.
I think pragmatism is essential. In today's environment, we need economic resilience. We need to rebuild manufacturing capability. We need to bolster our defence sector. It's essential that the energy transition is achieved in a pragmatic way that sustains jobs, investment levels and economic contribution at the same level or better. I've talked about the work that we're doing, comparing pay, terms and conditions across sectors to make sure that, irrespective of which energy sector somebody is working in, they are paid well, that they have good terms and conditions. But I think first and foremost it's important to recognise the important role that the energy sector, that the workforce plays in delivering the energy that we need today. We bring £20 billion of investment to the economy every single year, and we need to sustain that. The reality is that we will continue to need oil and gas for many decades to come, and we have a brilliant opportunity in the UK to meet up to half of those needs.
I mean, I mentioned electrical engineers, but are there any subsectors, any skills or any places, Aberdeen, I think of Grangemouth, or any locations that the government has to focus on when it's transitioning the workforce? Or I guess maybe this will be felt evenly across the country, or certainly down that Tyneside, down that east coast and across the west where North Sea oil workers come from.
I think what's essential is that we avoid a jobs gap, that we don't see any one sector declining faster than new sectors build out. And that again comes back to the point around pragmatism and the pace at which we move, so that we sustain jobs, we sustain economic contribution, we sustain investment.
If I may come in, yeah, I agree with Katy, and obviously Aberdeen's going to need a very targeted approach, reskilling into the transition for workers in offshore wind, CCS, hydrogen. I think the pace of the projects as they happen is going to be really critical in how that plays out. I've mentioned our pilot program, so again there are things that you can do here to actually make sure that we avoid the job gaps. I think someone mentioned Teesside and Humber, key industrial cluster for hydrogen and for CCS, and that's going to be subject to project timescales as well. That's going to need rapid expansion of the workforce, cross-skilling. So again, there's things we can do. I mentioned our regional skills hub initiative up at Catch on the Humber side. That's putting capacity in the system so that we train more new entrants to come in, again, to smooth out the gaps that Tracy mentioned. And nuclear as well. Nuclear is really, really important in needing continued investment in skills so that we can not only support what's going on at Hinkley Point, but also the transfer across to Sizewell C over time, where there's huge projects going on. And with that in mind, Tim and I, back in January, signed a skills charter with the East Suffolk District Council and Suffolk County Council and with Sizewell C so that we can start to plan long term for what the skills map's going to look like over the next 10-15 years at Sizewell. So.
Yeah, sorry,
Katy and then Tim. So.
I just wanted to reiterate how important it is for sectors to work together, and the governments can help support that. We talked about that, the Clean Energy Task Force in January, and I think there was a commitment there to work towards a cross-sector workforce demand planning model. That's what's going to help us ensure that we meet each sector's needs at the time when they're required.
Yeah, I'm doing a second. Tim, but Katy, the Chair mentioned skills passport, and so have you, and that's an example, I guess, of collaboration between government and industry. It's a good title. Is it working? Is it going to work for real for workers?
It has huge opportunity. It has huge potential. I think we're excited to start working on the second phase, and in fact next week we're coming together, Renewable UK, Offshore Energies UK, together with the Clean Office for Clean Jobs and Scottish Government to look at what the second phase will entail. We want to bring other sectors in. The nuclear sector, there's a huge opportunity there. They have a skills shortage for us to look at how we can meet skills demands now and in the future.
Okay, thanks, Tim. You wanted to come in?
Yeah, I think it's emphasising this conversation, emphasising the importance of workforce planning. So particularly in Sizewell, because I know Andrew and I almost on a weekly basis talk about Sizewell, but in meeting the skills needed for Sizewell, what will be really easy to happen is it just sucks all of the skills out of all of the other sectors, because the skills to do Sizewell, a lot of those people have fluidity in how they apply those skills. So on the one hand, there could be a scaffolder at Sizewell, on the other hand, there could be a scaffolder at Mrs. Jones's kind of house putting an extension on, and it's that kind of fluidity. If we're not careful, we'll satisfy one demand and then create a vacuum in another.
David wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that with all due respect to all the bodies that exist, if you look at Hinkley Point, one of the successes of Hinkley Point was a very simple partnership between EDF and Bridgewater and Taunton College, and that partnership didn't need anybody to tell them what to do. They didn't need any kind of intervention. What they needed was some investment in the college to get on and do. Bridgewater and Taunton, interestingly, is now saying to the government, we're essential to the investment in the battery factory in Bridgewater. And what we actually need is just a bit of cash to be able to put a learning centre on site to train people. So sometimes we need to cut through all of the noise and actually just get to fund the partnerships that actually deliver this, as well as doing some of the work nationally.
We've been very proud to be part of that and invest in Bridgewater and Taunton.
Well, that's a good lesson if nuclear comes back to Scotland, I guess. Thank you, Chair.
Can I follow up on this? It's in relation to devolution and place, it's interesting that we started talking about devolution, we moved on to place, and quite quickly we ended up talking about very specific places with very high-end jobs attached to very big bits of kit. And in the previous panel, we were actually talking about the fact that we've got to do retrofit across the whole country, all jobs everywhere. I'm interested in the fact that we've got an hourglass workforce economy, right? High-skilled jobs like those ones at Hinckley. All the chippies in Somerset, you're right, are basically busy at Hinckley and you can't get your kitchen done. And then there's the low-skilled jobs at the other end, of which there are many, and we have also a shortage. I'm interested in how we build out, fatten that waste of non-graduate jobs, which is vital for this transition. Bearing in mind the devolution plans at the moment are focused around metro mayors in big conurbations, and forgive me, I will be very parochial about this. I represent East Thanet, which is at the end of England before you get to France, and a long way away from any of those big conurbations. I'm interested, and the other end from Torquay, we talk about this a lot for obvious reasons. What model of governance and delivery would help us get those non-graduate jobs and the non-graduate skills we need to do that transformation in every single place in the country, which doesn't have a big capital river by it, as it were, where you've got a big piece of energy kit happening or industry development happening.
So that's my point about investing in colleges. There are colleges all over. East Kent College is a
It's
great
very
example,
good, yes,
doing some superb work. It's not enough because they can't scale it quickly. What they need is...
I'm interested in the scale and strategy point.
But don't come up with some wonderful governance model. We've got 160 general FE colleges, most of which have got construction, most of which are doing superb work on this. I mentioned the City of Liverpool region, 6 colleges, and I don't know, Bill, if you've seen it, doing brilliant work, deciding who does what. The 4 colleges in Kent can do the same. If they're given a small amount of capital and a small amount of revenue to engage with the employers.
And a small amount of responsibility.
Yeah, and some trust.
Right.
And that's what's missing from the system. They haven't been trusted in the last 15 years, and we're saying to the government, trust in them, make them accountable for it. Absolutely make them accountable. Tell them how to do it, support them to do it, but trust them to get on with it.
We obviously create the demand, as we said, yes. Andrew?
Again, it doesn't need a fancy model. It needs someone to stand in the middle and make it happen, and that's what we've done at Catch.
That tends to end up being a fancy model in some way, because we need to have accountability and governance.
Yeah, but we've actually been able to invest in Catch in Grimsby, for example, nearly £500,000, pull in local industry, pull in local authorities, crowd in the private money and the public money together and make that happen. We're doing it at 4 other places as well, and it makes a huge difference. But the key defining thing each time is having a committed bunch of employers in there. That's what really makes it happen.
So broad construction employs about 2.6 million people. 90% of those that work in construction work in an organisation of 9 people and less. Exactly. And their recruitment approach is they recruit from friends of family, that recruit from somebody they met in a pub, somebody that's put a note on Facebook, etc., etc. And whilst I'm a big fan of FE colleges, and I'm happy to support everything that David's saying in terms of that investment, there is a disconnect because that 90% of construction don't look at FE to provide their workforce for them because it's too hard. So when they get a trainee, they have to look after them. They have to pay for wages where they're not being productive as such. They'd much rather go out there and get a labourer and leave the skilled workforce to do this. Excuse me. Now, this was the narrative that we've been talking to DFE over the last few weeks, and why we got the package on at the weekend to exactly address that, to make sure that the colleges are better integrated into the smaller business, and the smaller businesses look towards the FE colleges to provide some of their solutions. In addition to that, what we have is CITB put a program together which is New Entrant Support Team. In effect, it's people going out there talking to small businesses and saying, do you want an apprentice? And I think we heard at the last evidence says actually at least half of them say yes, but they haven't got the wherewithal or investment to be able to do it. What the New Entrant Support Team does, it takes away all of the barriers that those employers face. Either I don't know how to do it, I don't know who to talk to, I don't know where the funding comes from, I don't know what to do when I get them. All of that then rests with the New Entrant Support Team. And since we've put that team in place, it's resulted in at least 5,000 new apprenticeship starts, and those that have started, 90% are still retained. So the announcement on Sunday was we will CITB will double that New Entrant Support Team. So what you have there is a team that's actually trawling that local demand from those small employers and bringing that to the colleges so that we've got that interface. And it's a labour-intensive model, don't get me wrong, but when you're talking to small businesses, there's no other methodology that you can do that.
Just a couple of small points, which are hopefully relevant, but to the point you made earlier.
It's okay, we've got wind farms as well, so yeah, go on.
So what we're hearing from regions like yours, and we've worked with the Great South West and with Celtic Sea Power, is, well, if we don't have a metro mayor, if we don't have a free port, then how do we get attention? So I think there's a really important role to make sure that every region, which has a really important part to play, from the Great South West to Inverness, for example, can see clearly that they have a role to play in the nation achieving its ambitions. And we also haven't talked about the need for parity of esteem with apprenticeships. I think there's much more that needs to be done to educate employers, parents, kids, that apprenticeships are a brilliant route, and they don't place any sort of ceiling on your career potential, and I think that can also help in terms of that middle.
I mean, there's a big job to be done on equality and diversity as well, isn't there? You know, so this is a very male sector. The big opportunity is to break down some of those barriers. You get more women working in the sector, and you open up massive opportunity. But that's a perception. The only way you really change that is through employers changing the way they behave, and that, I think that's a massive challenge.
Thank you. David, thank you very much for extolling the virtues twice now, I think, of the Liverpool City region and the way the FE colleges there combine. And just to put the case for the good things that are going on in our city regions, but also to support my colleagues who need, and I think to Katy's point, we need this in every part of the country, not just in the big regions. Just a final question from me, I think. I mean, is there anything that government can do, because it's recommendations to government that we are here primarily to make to improve the collaboration and to address the significant challenges that you've been collectively highlighting?
I think there's one ask, and that's the certainty of what the future looks like, because people can plan for that, and then having the planning, the pipeline of work and activity being transparent, and making sure that particularly smaller business can get access to that, because at the minute the procurement hurdles are too high for a small business to get involved in. But if there's a 10-year infrastructure planning horizon, for example, actually that means that businesses will have more confidence to invest in skills. I think that would be a game changer.
Way along, Katy.
I think to the point around certainty of the future, I think the government, we would welcome the government to recognise the reality of the energy mix today, to champion our supply chain and the workforce. We need a stable, responsible energy strategy at the heart of industrial strategy. Governments need to prioritise homegrown energy, homegrown oil and gas over imports, and that's going to help build the path to the new energy sectors of the future.
I think I back up what Tim said around an understanding of the future. I think having the best labour market intelligence you can. There's a lot of choices that government can make to use existing labour market intelligence, including ours, to have a really good view of the future and understanding of what project timescales are and what the project pipeline actually looks like. Will give employers greater confidence. Yeah.
I'd add just one thing on English devolution, so apologies. English devolution needs a system approach, and we need Skills England to not just determine how many heat pump engineers we need, but to actually work with the elected mayors and the strategic authorities to make sure that they have the ability to take ownership of that and are accountable for delivering their share of that. And within that, they can help develop the partnerships between employers and colleges and others that are needed. So Skills England, I think, and a devolution approach. We've got a report coming out next week, which we can send you, that describes the system that's needed. It's very simple.
Right. Well, thank you all very much. And as I said earlier, we're very keen to hear your written follow-up evidence. There's some really, really key challenges that you've identified, and I think between you have a lot of very productive ideas that you're taking, not just from your own organisations, but from industry and your sectors more widely, that we would be very, very pleased to hear, because it's going to really add value in what we put into our final report to the government. So can I thank you all for your evidence today, and that concludes